All right, so we're live. We're gonna give it a few minutes here for people to start jumping in. Um, yeah, so first of the year, I'm curious. New Year's resolutions, you got any?
New Year's resolutions for me, definitely working out more.
Yeah,
I need. I'm now with the gym in the office. I'm going to try and come in a couple days a week, either earlier or
nice.
stay later, and
Yeah,
do that. And then that's really the main one right now. Yeah.
nice.
How about yourself? Hadn't really thought of it, but that was kind of just a general plan. Wasn't really thinking about it as a New Year's resolution necessarily.
Yeah, I always go back and forth. I don't have any this year. I'm intentionally being like, I'm good. I'm just gonna like go with things as they play out, and kind of make adjustments as I need. I will say, like, although I've not made any resolutions, I am like wanting to work out more, all that good stuff. Because I used to be pretty heavy on it. It kind of pulled back, just getting busy. So I'm trying to
Yeah,
do more like at home kind of stuff. But yeah, so I'm intentionally not doing that, which I'm kind of excited for. Things
yeah.
get a little hectic at times, you know. Uh,
Definitely. Yeah, it's tough to fit in sometimes. Yeah, I've kind of
yeah,
squeezed in a small routine at home with free weights and stuff, but you gotta.
nice.
I need more cardio. I need more cardio for sure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So as everybody's jumping in here, again, this is a open forum kind of thing. So questions, comments, feedback, all the things. So as you're jumping in here, make sure to comment. Let us know, do you have any resolutions as a seller? Any plans, any goals as a seller? Those are always kind of fun to talk about. I feel like it's not really talked about as often. What's the yearly goal for you as a business owner? It's pretty common to set KPIs, but kind of what's the stretch goal here? What are you trying to hit? Are you trying to break six figures, break seven figures, break eight figures? That'd be insane. That sounds awesome. Uh, yeah, it's funny. Like when I was a seller, six figures just seemed like the craziest thing, and you blow past it, and then seven figures. Obviously, it takes a little bit longer, but I am seeing people grow way faster than I ever saw anybody grow when I was a seller, 5+ years ago. I mean, just
Mhm.
just watching people be like, "Oh, I've been doing this for like 6 months." You look at the data, you're like, "What? How?" That used to be so difficult, but I do feel like there's a lot more tools, software, education that's available that makes it a little bit more straightforward for people. But yeah, it's been pretty awesome watching people just catapult their growth rates.
Yeah, yeah. I think it does make sense just having, like you said, more of those resources available and just being able to kind of replicate similar results a little bit easier once you kind of find what works. It's able to kind of double down on that, copy that strategy, whether it's for similar listings, other listings, and then kind of finding that balance. But yeah, I think we've mentioned it a couple times on these office hours. Like this year is going to be a huge year for growth, just being able to access data and use that to your advantage. And I think that combined with just the tools and education that's already out there, just going to continue to see people grow at an
Yeah,
unusually fast pace, I think.
yeah, yeah. I agree. 2024 already seems in the 2 weeks it's been roughly. It's crazy just seeing how fast things are already changing. There's a ton of new software that's getting launched. New models in the AI front that are becoming incredible. People messing around with what are called AI agents. So this is basically you creating multiple roles, and then they basically self-delegate and work together and specialize. And then yesterday we saw a company with their first launch. It's called Rabbit.tech. Super cool. They launched a physical hardware product with AI built in. It's like a native thing, called the R1, and it's just, if you haven't seen the movie Her, it's very much like what he holds is like
Yeah.
kind of the vibe. I'm like, this is kind of sick. Like the whole concept of, let me just talk to you and you go and do the task because you understand my tools and all that, in context and all that kind of stuff is pretty interesting, right? You know me, like I geek out with technical leverage quite a bit,
Mhm.
and the concept that I could just say, hey, could you go do this for me? It's like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Let me go do that. Like, great, you're done. One of the demos was, um, hey, give me an Uber home. It's like, great. I know where you're at. I know where your home is. That good? You go, yeah, confirm. Head out. I was like, wow. Like, it seems like a minor thing. These are like obviously like rough demos, just to launch, but you start to kind of see how these things could interact, especially in the e-com space. Because as I'm watching their keynote, the thing that I immediately go to is, could I have a spreadsheet like a lot of OA sellers do that my VAs have put together, and I can say, hey, can you analyze these? Put together a PO. I have 15 grand available. Make sure you optimize it for ROI and put together, an order summary for me. And then great, that looks good. Email it over to whoever runs purchasing in your company, right? Like you just see how fast you could be able to accomplish tasks and get answers to things too. Like I think being able to talk to your data is one area that we as a company are pretty excited about. Not just like here's all your data, but like can we talk with our data? Like it's such a new concept. So that's something I'm like, really excited for. Just as 2 weeks into the new year, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think especially where those specific tasks like observing data and trying to come up with patterns, solutions, summaries, things like that that would take a manual person so much longer to do. It just is able to run through that much quicker, and then that just frees
Yeah.
up so much time for you. So yeah, that's been really interesting. Being able to now kind of proactively give AI data to go through instead of it just observing what it already has access to.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty mind blowing, watching. I have a weird affinity for 80s hacker tech nerdy films. And kind of seeing what their vision was and now being, oh, that's happening. Like that's real. Like we get to live through that period, which is pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we have a few updates. As we're working through, we talked last week about our feedback system in Canny, which I'll actually show you guys here if you want to add or vote, which is pretty important. We're going through these things and saying, great, can we roll some of these things out relatively fast, or these like bigger lifts, in which case, great, let's go scope it out and kind of prioritize. But one of the major ones was being able to essentially reorder your columns in the listings table view, right? So with 1.0 release, we allowed you to decide which ones you wanted to show, which ones you wanted to hide, right? Certain things you love and you care about, other pieces of data, you're like, I could care less. Great, get it out of your way. Now you can actually go in and say, great, I want to see this first, this second, this third. And that persists for you as a user, which is kind of cool because if you have VAs with their own accounts, they can set it up however they want and it doesn't override what you're doing, which is super important. So we're pretty pumped about that release. So that's available now. We'll have a changelog go live on I believe Friday, just fully announcing it. But yeah, that's fully live now, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it just makes it easier. You don't have to, you can already eliminate the columns, but just kind of having you, whether it's those 4 or 5, 6 columns, just immediately the first ones that you see, so you don't have to scroll back and forth. You can rearrange those. If you click on the plus icon on the right side, you'll see kind of 4 dots next to each section. You can drag and drop those up or down, and that'll rearrange the listing section for you.
Yeah, yeah, pretty exciting stuff. It's funny. I'm kind of going towards mobile for some reason in my brain, just because
Mhm.
you know when I was a seller, there was nothing you could do on mobile outside of scanning products, which feels so like baseline. But now we're getting to a point where this is why we took a pretty strong stance on like Aura being mobile friendly, like as a baseline. Like everything we do now is just by default works on mobile. The amount of things you're able to just get done on your phone, I think it's starting to change, which sounds kind of funny because you're like, yeah, obviously, but not so obvious in the Amazon space, right? Like
Mhm.
most tech companies have a mobile app, but in the Amazon software space, that's rarely done, if at all. Or if it is done, it's very like just kind of like hacked together, just to be like, oh, we technically have it. Um, but I think you're getting to a point where you're starting to see more mobile enhanced UI UX stuff like that, like really making the workflows make sense for mobile. Because a lot of sellers, especially RA sellers, you're on the road. I love seeing pictures on Twitter when somebody's like in their car with the laptop pulled up and they're like, "Oh, I'm making changes." I'm like, that looks like a horrible experience. Versus like just your phone's probably already in your hand anyways, right? Just pull it up, do whatever you got to do, and move on with your life. So I think a lot of that's going to change in the next year. I hope we'll see.
Yeah, not being hard or having to be hardwired. Obviously, it was like used to be you would only have a desktop, and now the laptops came out. You could kind of do it on the go, and then just not having to actually have the laptop and just have that phone that's in your pocket. Open that up, make sure things are pricing accurately, or whatever
Yeah.
you're looking at. Lets you do that on the go in the warehouse, or if you're checking on inventory in different locations, things like that. So yeah, definitely kind of frees up some more time to do or allocate that time more effectively.
Yeah. So again, as you guys are jumping in here, make sure you are asking questions, giving us some areas to kind of go dive deeper into. Otherwise, I will geek out with AI the entire time. I'll try not to. But yeah, there's a lot on the roadmap, a lot of things we're wanting to work on. The roadmaps are really growing. Really, the feature request, should I say, roadmap for sure has been growing, but the feature requests that we're seeing um, is really growing fast, and it's pretty exciting for us because it helps us not have to sit there and be like, great, we're just going to make this big bet and I hope it makes sense. It's just you get to see exactly what your users are asking for. Move really fast on that, and also like I think for me, this is one of the bigger things, probably like number two on the hierarchy, if you will, is like which users are asking that, and you get to have a direct conversation and say, okay, well, here's how we're thinking about solving that problem. Does this rationally make sense to you? Because sometimes the way we would want to approach it is not necessarily the best way, just because there's subtle nuances, right? Like we might think it should be this kind of complex, but actually it could be super simple. In which case we can move faster. So we're able to beta test with users, put prototypes in front of users before even running code, which is amazing. And then just be like, great, by the time we go to launch it, go live, what have you, it's in a really good state and it's just well received, which is like super exciting as a product team.
Yeah, I think especially being able to quantify the impact in terms of how many users an update is going to kind of positively affect, and then also making sure that we don't make a feature change based on a request that makes it harder than it needs to be. Like you said, having that dialogue with the
Right.
folks that are actually requesting those features just makes it so our team can work most effectively, and then in turn make the platform most effective for everyone on board as well.
Yeah, I think that's one area that I'm really excited about as a internal team is just like really streamlining all of this to be able to know exactly what to work on next. That's going to have the maximum impact, how to work on it, how to solve it, all those things. It not only makes our lives easier, it just makes it easier for us to go in and just add a ton of value, which it's really hard to beat, is what I'll say.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Cool. All right. So again, as you're jumping in, throw any questions you have our way. We're happy to dive deep into anything you want to. Um, I am starting to slowly see more tech savvy sellers, is what I want to call them. People that are wanting to build their own automations to be like, I'm not going to do this manually, or I'm not going to give this to a VA because I can use Zapier or Make.com or ChatGPT as an example.
Mhm.
Um, Handing over more things to software, which makes sense, but our industry has not really been that heavy. If we're talking like mainstream sellers, it's been just outsource it. That's the go-to thing in our space, right?
Mhm.
Just outsource it, man. um, and that's sometimes a good answer. Not always, though. Forget his name now, but there's a concept called OAO. It's like basically how you go about optimizing processes, right? And so the first one, it's a sequential process. You just optimize the process first, right? Because even if you give it to somebody else, if it's a horrible process, they're still doing a horrible process. And even if you automate it, still a horrible process. So you optimize it, then you go to the A, which is automation, and then whatever is left over, then you can outsource it. And I feel like a lot of people kind of default to that last one really fast. They're like, oh, just give it to a VA, let them run wild. End up having a lot of trouble, as you could, understand, as you could expect, which is not really ideal, but you tend to see it pretty frequently, I'd say.
Mhm.
But it is cool to see more people, wanting to learn things like Airtable, Zapier, and look to automate things. Casey, I'm curious to see, you've been with us for a little while now, kind of like how we approach solving problems internally and even just basic processes. Like, could you speak to like how we tend to approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, like a lot of our sellers, have started to do are trying to lean on automation as much as possible, specifically in support, trying to have our initial problem solving bot serve up articles that hit the target words of whatever questions you're having. So we can hopefully self serve that solution faster, give you the right resource. And then on top of that, just being able to find common trends and recognize, hey, a lot of people are having issues here. Let's make a resource doc for that. And just trying to really streamline how we can provide that service and assistance to our customers. And then internally with me in chat a lot, it's a lot of me kind of making sure that I'm up to date on our own tools that we use, always making sure that when they have a new release, making sure I'm up to date on how to use that most effectively to streamline my day as well. So it is kind of a combination of automation that serves the customers and our users here, and also automation that frees up more time for us so we can continue to make those feature request improvements, improve the platform, improve our service. So it is kind of a two-tailed effect, and definitely something that I think a lot of our sellers have started to do. Like you said, any early adopters on any tech are now used to that workflow, if you will, and trying to find different ways to automate things. And we'll start to see kind of more and more sellers fall into that bucket of being intelligent tech savvy users who want to leverage it as much as possible.
Yeah, we have a saying which is like your job shouldn't be difficult. Like part of your job is making your life easier, not harder, right? And I remember when you first came on, I was like, question everything. like, just because we do it a certain type of way does not mean that's the best way. And this kind of harks back to my gripe about hiring VAs a little too soon versus like building a team, which like I don't care where somebody lives, that's not really the point. It's really
Mhm.
like the mentality and perspective on it, which is like you hire people for their brain, not to complete a task or to own a role. Like, yeah, they will own a role and they will complete tasks, but at the end of the day, tasks and roles should change because that person, if you're hiring the right people, should be taking responsibility to jump in and say, great, like I can automate 80% of this job. Awesome. Do it. Let's go find the next thing to solve. Versus a lot of companies will have the perspective of, no, you're hired to do this, just do the work. So now there's really no incentive for you to make things better. And now you're kind of stuck. That's not really exciting. You don't have much autonomy or say. So I think when you start to like build teams, you kind of have to change your perspective away from being what I call a business owner to being a founder. Like the perspectives are kind of different. Like it's the same thing, but like if you go look up books for business owners, the content's vastly different than those written for founders. Founders, it's like hire people dramatically smarter than you are to do those jobs. Awesome. Business owner, it's like you're special and like just hire somebody to complete it. It's like, fundamentally flawed in my opinion. Like sometimes you got to, I get it, but man, like the difference between building like a really well-defined team of amazing people versus like 20 VAs, I would argue the 20 VAs are going to fail a lot more often, or at least hold you back than the really refined team that's built to really come in and just own the role, right? Like it kind of, as a founder, takes you out of the loop a lot of you have to decide on everything, make every decision, and solve every problem, be the expert in everything to be like, no idea. That's why we hired you. Like, that's kind of your job now. Um, Definitely different perspective, but I'm hoping that a lot of sellers are slowly starting to kind of make that change themselves and start to kind of adapt and grow as they're growing their businesses.
Yeah, I think, and it's something that we kind of talk about a lot in customer success, customer support, is being proactive as opposed to reactive. I feel like a lot of the business language is reactive advice. You have to react to things that are happening when you're a business owner, when you're a founder. You have to
Hmm.
proactively think about things that are kind of come up. Obviously, we do that in support, identifying those trends and proactively figuring out, hey, let's have an external resource for this, so then people don't have to kind of reach out for it, and then we react to that. So I think it's kind of that
Yeah,
general shift of going from reactive to proactive to kind of solve those solutions and make an impact.
yeah, totally makes sense. Just checking one thing here. Looks our team just let us know that there's possibly an issue with loading, so we're gonna see if we can get this fixed real quick. Give us just one moment here. All right. Okay. So it looks like I got that fixed. I think we're going to be okay here. Awesome. Sweet. Okay. Little error on our part. Luckily, our team found it, so that's good. All right. Cool. Awesome. So just triple checking here on our end. Sorry for the delay and the banter. So Casey, for you, what else is top of mind for you right now? Just kind of in the space. What are things you're curious about learning, or you know things that you think are kind of should be focused on in 2024 as a seller, or really just in the e-com space, I think as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked a lot about inventory management and being able to make intelligent buys. Obviously, that allows you to have a lower minimum price, a wider range to price within, and kind of make that impact there. I've been trying to find more tools, and I'm blanking on the name of one right now. I know a lot of folks use Keepa as a good way to track kind of trends on different listings. Let me pull up a quick listing here. There's essentially one tool that I've been using just to kind of analyze different listings here that will show it's essentially like a cost calculator that's just built right
Yeah.
into that listing that just lets you kind of plug in
Mm.
that price and figure out if it's going to be, hey, maybe a good item for me to spend some time on, or if it's
Yeah.
just a maybe a not intelligent buy at the moment. I can't find the name of it, but let's see here.
Is it a Chrome extension?
It is a Chrome extension, and it shows up kind of in green writing right next to or underneath the listing itself.
Mhm.
But I
Is it
believe
RevSeller?
it is RevSeller. Yep, I just saw
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been one that I've been having fun kind of playing with and kind of going through different categories of listings, specific listings, and kind of using that to just see where people might have margins based on the purchase price and things of that nature.
Sure. Yeah, RevSeller, man, there's been so many Chrome extensions for sellers. That was like the go-to for software, I feel. DS, Amazon Quick View for seeing insights there, BSR, all that good stuff. Keepa, obviously, RevShare, RevSeller. There's a Seller Amp now. So many more that I mean, we have a list. Actually, I put together a blog post about a year, maybe 2 years ago, of just like I think it was like 50 or 100 tools, just massive amounts, right? I think that's kind of hard for a lot of sellers getting started. It's like, where do I start? What do I need? When do I need it? It's very easy to find yourself spending more money on software than on inventory. And so you kind of have to think about when does it make sense to use certain tools. I kind of break this down really into two categories. So I think the first category, which is more common than not, is the efficiency tool. This is something that's going to help speed you up. But my issue with that is that if you're not effective, right? There's a difference between being effective and being efficient. If you're not very effective at sourcing, but you bring on a tool that makes you faster at sourcing, well, now you're just efficiently ineffective, right? It doesn't really help you out a ton. What you really should do is spend more time on the manual side, really refining the skill set, and then layer on efficiency tools once it makes sense. But then you do have effectiveness based tools. These are less common. Aura happens to be in that route because it's not really speeding up your process. Where if you don't really understand the process, it doesn't work. It's really just owning the whole task for you, which is kind of cool. And so you kind of have to think about where you at as a seller, and for each skill you have, or each process you have, should I say, really think about like, where am I at in terms of my effectiveness right now? And if you feel like, oh, I crush it, great. Go look for an efficiency based tool, because now the ROI is going to be so clear. But if there's an area where you could just pay and be like, great, you just do that for me at like 1,000x the processing power I ever could, like repricing, great, go ahead and do that. Because at that point, it just makes sense, right? Like there's a big difference in ROI between your effectiveness based tools and then your efficiency based tools. So once you start to understand that, it makes life a little bit easier, and it gives you at least a general framework for deciding when to use new tools versus not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to identify like the difference between those areas, specifically when you're a new seller and you don't really fully comprehend maybe where you're going to end up spending most of your time anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe it'd be a good idea for us to release like a shorter best tools list for people just getting started, kind of get it
Mhm.
into a little bit more quick hitters like, hey, if you're having trouble in this area, this is a great tool and things like that. Just to kind of help those newer sellers get a grasp a little bit quicker and kind of hit the ground
Yeah.
running a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. In software, we always have our tech stack, right? These are things that are like everything works together, it's integrated, it's really well thought out, it can scale up, scale down, what have you. And I do believe there's a optimal tech stack for sellers. So I'm glad you brought this up because this is something I've wanted to explore, um, to kind of help sellers, yeah, understand like what do you need, when do you need it, kind of like what are the best tools that work also together, if at all possible. Because anytime you can have integrations, it tends to be a better option. Um, integrations are not as heavy in the Amazon seller space as they should be. We're hoping we can change some of that in the future, in the near future. So it really just depends, but I think for the most part, it's a good thing. It's a good way to view things, right? Is to just say, what's my stack? How does it work together? What problems am I actually trying to solve here? And then putting things in place, to make sure they're solved.
Yeah, and I think especially finding tools that speak together effectively is extremely helpful. A lot of times,
Yeah,
being able to consolidate and just have things, well, whether it's a lot of tools plug into one tool that you can then kind of consolidate your time into, makes things a little bit easier. I found myself at previous careers bouncing from one platform to the other, and that just takes a lot of time as well. So, yeah, it's great to have a good tool that's effective and saves you time. But if you have six, seven different tools that don't really work well together, maybe it's better to have a couple more tools that do and maybe lose one or two shiny features that maybe don't make a big impact on your day to day.
yeah. I'm a big fan of new tools. That becomes a problem sometimes. Sometimes you just don't need tools. You just need to do the work. Sometimes this kind of actually goes back to my concept of just in time information versus just in case information. Sometimes you're actively hiring for the first time. So yeah, you should go consume content on how to do that, how to think about it, all that good stuff. But if you're 2 months into running the business and at no point do you need to hire for the next 3 months, you have other things you can spend your time on, even intellectually. Kind of the same concept really for choosing a new tool or when to explore tools, right? In computer science, you kind of have this concept of exploring versus exploiting, right? And so kind of in the early days, you want to explore a lot. And then eventually you have really refined requirements, you know what you need, and then you start to do what's called exporting, which is really, it sounds horrible because exploiting sounds bad, but really all it means is like you know what you're doing and you triple down on that thing. Everything else is irrelevant, and you just kind of move on with your life because you solved that problem, right? So I'm a big fan of having a problems or a frustration list. It's a note document. Every time something causes you frustration, write it down. That's all you gotta do. All you have to do is write it down, um, and once a week, sit down and just go through and just be like, great, what can I solve right now? Solve it. Sometimes it's spending money, sometimes it's a simple solution, sometimes it's spending 5 seconds fixing that one little thing that doesn't really work the way that you expected it to, but you don't have the time to fix it immediately in real time. Great, that's fine. Um, those have been awesome. I do this actually at home too. So I have like a home version of this where I'm like, oh gosh, it's driving me insane. And so I'll just go through every now and then and be like, okay, is there something I could buy that just basically eliminates that frustration or that task or that problem for me? Um, that makes life a little bit easier, in my opinion, which is kind of nice. Um, yeah, it's kind of something we do internally too, right? Like find something that frustrates you and then go fix it, right? It's kind of what you guys do like day in and day out.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Growing up, I was always bad at itemizing my priorities and things to do, and my sister was huge in making lists. So now I'm a big list person. Friday afternoon, I try to have a hit list of like, hey, how do I have to wrap up work for the week? Can I solve anything that's going to help next week? And then similarly, Sunday morning list before obviously football season's going. Before football starts, you want to get those problems out of the way, or just before you get your day started, so that you can relax for the rest of it. So yeah,
Yeah.
kind of being able to just or not consolidate, just bucket those items together into one time where you're like, hey, I got 2 hours. Let's just hammer out as many of these as I can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I used to do something that I should probably start doing again. I called it Sunday maintenance. It was just a checklist that popped up every Sunday. And it was like the minimum amount of things to do to just make sure that the upcoming week was just going to be fine. It was simple things like, clean these 3 areas. Okay, cool. If I just, I don't need to deep clean everything, but if I just did these minimal things, the apartment, the house is going to look nice and clean. It's going to be, declutter the brain too. Um, you know, dishes, laundry, like it's like the basic stuff. But what's funny is, when you're just in day to day living life, that stuff tends to just fall to the wayside versus you don't have to worry about it throughout the week. You can let it kind of pile up a little bit and just know that, cool, on Sunday I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. going to be really in a good position here, and I'm not really going to have to worry about stuff. You know, I need to get back to doing that. That actually, yeah, I haven't done that in a while. It's been a hot minute, and that just made life great. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to do that again.
Yeah, the big one for me is always laundry. It's always tough middle of the week. You're like, this is my last pair of socks or underwear, so I have to do laundry tonight. But yeah, it definitely helps kind of just be organized and
Yeah.
gets the clutter out of my head and down concrete paper. Always makes it
Mhm.
easier to kind of manage that way.
Yeah. Yep. And this just goes back to the concept of checklists. Great book on this, the Checklist Manifesto, by a Dr. Atul Gawande, I believe is his name. I'm going to butcher his last name. I apologize. Short book, wonderful book, by the way. And it just talks about, like, you want to know why planes don't crash that often? Because their checklists are massive manuals and they follow it every single time. It's like you do these same things as a seller, right? You can jump in and say, okay, well, here's my checklist for sourcing. Or when I am analyzing a product, I make sure to ask these 5 questions or do these 5 things. If I do these 5 things, I'm going to eliminate 90% of the potential issues I could or have seen prior. I did this myself. My first wholesale order, I completely botched. And so I was like, okay, I messed up. Let me go back through the process of analyzing this product. And I changed my perspective from let me find a reason to buy this to let me find a reason not to buy this. And then all of a sudden, I started to notice all the red flags, and I noticed where they were. And so I started to create this checklist to say, okay, well, if this is true, don't buy it. If this is true, don't buy it. And I would go through that. And what I realized is I got to a point where if I couldn't like complete that, like basically I went through, I was like, everything looks good. I kind of have to buy it, right? Like I have looked at all the things that I know about that would say, don't buy this if, and I came up with a goose egg. So I'm probably going to buy it. It helps you eliminate 80% of just the issues that are just super common that go over your head, right? You haven't eaten in 4 hours. Great, you're a little hungry, so your brain's not processing correctly. Like all these things, because we're human, right? Super important to kind of think about.
Definitely.
Yeah, got a question in here. See, Prince coming in with a question. Let's see here. I think last week you guys said that Maven is aware of Amazon's low price FBA rates, which replace small and light. That is correct. Is Maven able to avoid what I call the dead zone of fee discrepancy? For example, if I sell a DVD at $9.99, after fees, the payout is $4.24. If I sell that same DVD at $10, the payout is only $3.28. The dead zone of a lower payout. Yep. So yes, we do. So we call these profit reduced ranges is the term that we use internally and in support documentation. So we do factor these in. So Aura's not only looking at that for updating your price, also looking at if we're automatically calculating your mins or your maxes. Very important. This was like a major change with 1.0 and basically having the model and the infrastructure to do this kind of stuff. Because Legacy Aura just did not have that baked in. And so that was a major change for us. So we made sure to look at all the areas where that could be affected. Like again, your mins, your maxes, and obviously updating your price itself. So yes, not only is Maven aware of that, just Aura as a whole, whether you're using Maven AI or you're using a rule-based strategy, that's considered and factored in either way. There's nothing worse than be like, yay, I sold it higher. Oh, wait, I made less money. And that's because I went up a penny. So Aura is now aware of that. And we're looking at other areas that are kind of similar to this concept, right? Where it's like at the surface level, looks like a good idea. But when you really get into the weeds of it, you're like, actually, that doesn't rationally make sense. So just basically allowing the system to go deeper into data and really understand those complexities, be able to work within those complexities in a way that really makes sense. So yes, to answer the question, Prince, that is true. And by the way, I believe you're one of the people we sent a shirt to, so you should receive that somewhat soon. So I've got all those placed. They're going out. They're shipping out. It's all good. So you should have an Aura shirt in your inbox, in your mailbox. That's how digital I am. in the next couple of weeks. I wish I could email you a shirt. That'd be kind of cool.
I just immediately went to a mental picture of trying to figure out what a physical inbox would look like, but it is just a mailbox, I believe. So,
like technically, that is true. It is an inbox, but it is. So I'm reading this book right now on the concept of virtual natives. So there's like my generation is digital natives, and I think yours too, where we do the digital version of the analog thing, meaning I write an email very similar to writing a letter. I organize my files based on folders, which is very similar to the analog version, which is um, cabinets. Virtual natives, completely different. I'm already seeing this in my stepson now. We're like, he's like, why do I need to organize this? I just search. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, makes so much sense. Why would you ever create a folder structure when you could just search for the thing you want? And so there's a lot of interesting tidbits kind of like that where I'm like, oh, they never would have thought about that. They would be like, what do you mean mail you something? Like, I don't have to mail you something. I'm going to Slack it to you or DM you, whatever. So but what's funny is you have a lot of a younger generation coming in as first time sellers in the Amazon space, and their perspective on software, on processes, on how to get things done is very, very different. Feels very digital oriented versus, you have a lot of, mainstream sellers is what I'm going to call them, like just sellers that have been around for a while, where they do want to have their own warehouse. They do want to manage it all physically. But I think you have a younger generation that I'm seeing where they're like, nah, I don't want to do any of that. Like, there's a prep center for a reason, right? Like, I don't want to touch any of it. So it's funny. As I'm reading this book, I'm like, there's a few things where I relate, and a few things where I'm like, that sounds crazy, but I guess it makes sense. One of my friends, his younger sister, is this way. I remember I was trying to help her with her MacBook or something. Tons of files in the downloads folder, and I keep my downloads folder empty. I was like, what are you gonna do with all this? She was like, what do you mean? That's where I store all my documents. I was like, well, my brain, the download folders, that's where it goes, and then you do something else with it. She's like, no, that's all my downloaded files. I just search for whatever I want. I was like, whoa, kind of mind blowing. I'm curious, are you a folder like structure guy or are you a search guy?
I'm a search guy. It's weird.
Oh, okay.
I'm more of a search guy. I definitely belong to like the more digital generation, but there are things where like I do
Yeah,
prefer to be analog still. Like I prefer
right.
like physical lists. Like I know Finn uses his notes app for like his lists, and
Sure.
I don't use my notes app like at all. So
Okay.
it's interesting where I am still a little bit analog and then mostly digital and then somewhat
Sure.
virtual in a lot of different areas. So
So you're a hybrid.
yeah, I'm an amoeba like figure. I kind of adjust to wherever it seems best.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, there are some things that I do very like when I want to like think, I will handwrite. Um, for some reason, that's just nice. But if I'm doing like notes or work, like I kind of want it to be on a computer. But there are things where like I just want to explore different ideas, especially if it's like a visual kind of thing. I kind of need to draw it.
Mhm.
So I'll do that. But like my stepson's like, why are you writing that way? Because I write in cursive. And he's like, that makes no sense. I was like, well, you're not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope they don't teach cursive anymore. It's not very important in my opinion.
I don't think they do. Yeah, I like cursive. I write in either cursive or all caps because I'm a weirdo hybrid too in that way. No, so we have more people jumping in here. So as everybody's jumping in again, throw in your comments, questions, feedback, all the things. What features would you love to see us come out with? What problems are you having just as a seller? These are the types of questions and conversations I love to hear, which is just like I wish I could solve this thing or this thing keeps me up at night. I love those because they're so much fun to like as a thought experiment, go explore how could you solve that. Sometimes it's an easy solution. Sometimes it's honestly sending one email. Other times like, okay, well, like we're gonna have to build this ourselves. And like we like building things, so that's typically where my mind likes to go. It's like, oh, what if we did this and put this service here and then this software there, and like we can automate it. That's kind of where I tend to go, but it's not always the best solution. Let's be honest. So yeah, go ahead and throw your comments in here, your ideas, problems, concerns, all the things. Um, what are you looking forward to in 2024? A lot of things are changing. Hopefully you're adapting to these things and kind of looking at the horizon for what's going to be possible in the next 3 to 6 months and starting to kind of adapt the business to support that. A lot of large companies in the tech world are doing this right now. So the trickle down effect is going to happen, in my opinion, relatively fast. You don't have to adapt, obviously, but I think it's in your best interest to do so. So I have this affinity for the Copilot assistant theme. right? We kind of are starting to experience this internally as a team with our success support platform called Intercom. Just being able to fire off certain things or automate certain things or what have you. I think especially Intercoms, I'm seeing their vision for this and how it's changing rapidly, to be like, you're going to do just what you have to do and what we can't possibly do with software. I think it's going to also transition over to sellers across the board, right? Because sellers are still, although it's like a very specific industry and niche, you're still using tools that are in tech that are going to be thinking this way, right? Your inventory management system should be thinking this way. Your analytics system should be thinking this way. The tools you use for sourcing should be thinking this way, ideally. I think what's going to happen, though, I think it's going to be a slower adaptation period with the tools, with the companies in our space, because a lot of the software companies, there's great ones, certainly there's horrible ones too, but for the most part, it's less cutting edge. Let's build an awesome tech company, which is like kind of our vibe, and more like, oh, cool, like that makes money, let's do it. It's like, for us, we're always like, what about this thing? What about that thing? What if we could do this? Let's go explore it. Sometimes it's super pie in the sky. I'm definitely guilty of that. But I think that will vary depending on the company. It will vary depending on the company in terms of who's going to start to take the reins there and lead that innovation, and which ones are kind of going to just stay cash flow positive and just kind of ride it out. I'm hoping awesome companies start to crop up in the Amazon seller space that are thinking this way, more tech people coming in. Just because, man, like what is capable today is just bonkers, absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and one thing that's been interesting, obviously being a little bit newer to this industry, is it's like Amazon is obviously a virtual platform where you buy everything, but it is still a very in-person physical industry at times, managing your warehouse in person, getting the physical items. So I think, and this is just a theory on my part, that's potentially why it's taken this Amazon space a little bit longer to kind of catch up on the tech side of things, because everyone does still operate very much in a physical world a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Now we're getting a little bit more towards the folks that don't necessarily ever see their inventory and they're still selling. So as more people kind of gradually shift into that bucket, I think we're going to see kind of the ramp up of innovative technologies and the application of
Mhm.
it increase pretty significantly.
Yeah, there's another theme that I'm noticing starting, which is sellers moving to co-locate. So there's a lot of younger sellers moving to South Florida and just being like, great, we're going to live in the same neighborhood. We're going to hang out together. We're going to source together. We're going to solve problems together. They have their own businesses, but they're creating their own environment, which when I was a seller, nobody did that. They're like, what do you, no, like, we're going to chat on Facebook groups, right? Now they're like, no, Discord, Twitter, TikTok, and like we live, like I could throw a baseball at you, right? Like, I think that's going to start to change, and there's a few industries I've seen do that. Startups, that's kind of been the case a little bit. Obviously, everybody likes to go to San Francisco, to the Valley for VC funding and stuff like that. But you've seen these small groups to say, hey, we're going to rent a house, a massive house in Argentina, and the whole point is we come together, we're going to work together, and we're going to start our own companies independent of one another, but like supporting each other. I think that's going to start to change a little bit. So I think in a way, our space could become far more personal, maybe not physical, right? I think physical is not the right term from an operations perspective. I think a lot of that goes full digital.
Mhm.
But what's left over in terms of the community, in terms of your network, I think becomes tighter knit and becomes more geographically co-located, which is not a bad thing. I think it's definitely a different kind of perspective, but I could definitely see that occurring. You're seeing some little tidbits in tech as well, kind of talking about this concept of build a community online and then eventually go co-locate, to kind of really optimize your environment and your network locally for what you're attempting to achieve. The whole like you're the average of the five people around you. Well, great. What if the five people around you were really well selected and all working towards the same goal? That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's interesting. my previous roles, I've been mostly working remote for the last 3 plus years, and now joining Aura, it's really nice to be in person. I mean, obviously, having the ability to kind of jump on Zoom calls and do things like that, still very
Yeah.
effective, but it's a little bit different when you're all sitting in the same room. Someone has an idea, and then all of a sudden, you're in an impromptu 20-minute discussion about what's the next feature we're going to build, how is this going to
Yeah.
impact our users, and things like that. So, yeah, kind of being able to just be in the same space does lead to kind of that wildfire effect of idea of coming up with new ideas and different ways of thinking about things, whether it's
Mhm.
perspective shifts or whatever that may be.
Yeah. So Vadim had a thought here. Hey there, guys. I hope everything's going smoothly. Brought this up last week, and I believe enhancing Aura's focus on inventory would be fantastic. It could track items requiring restocking based on sales, offering notifications. Another idea could be a section within the listing view suggesting the approximate quantity needed for restocking, similar to what Amazon provides. Um, totally agree. I think the whole forecasting, right? If we, let's use the term forecasting over restocking for a moment. It's just one area I'm like, how has this not been solved? There are definitely tools that do it, but from everything I've seen, it's not done incredibly well. And I get it. Forecasting is surprisingly difficult from any perspective, but that doesn't mean it's not possible, right? You need enough data, you need the right models. But even if you could only get 80% of the way there, that's still pretty good. So I don't know if it's a lack of data or if it's lack of using the data correctly, or the models being built, like basically the solution to the problem is kind of the problem. I'm not sure, but yeah, we definitely see that being an important thing. There's a big difference between something called push versus pull, right? In a lot of software, you have to pull the information, you have to pull the insights, you have to pull the problems, right? You go into your account, you log in, you go, great, let me just go scour my entire account and see what I need to do. Well, ideally, that shouldn't be the case. It should be pushed to you, right? The insights should be say, you should get an email that says, hey, here's the things you should care about, and kind of here's what we recommend you to do about that. Here's a clear next action for you to take. And in an even more ideal fantasy world, you could say, sounds good, do it for me. Right? Like if that makes sense, you built it out, just do it for me. So this is something we're talking a lot about internally right now, is just better data that is very insightful in the way it's presented to you, but also actionable. At the end of the day, data is awesome, but if you can't take action on it, it's irrelevant. You might as well not have data. And I think that's kind of where a lot of sellers are stuck right now. You are drowning in data, but it's not actionable enough for you to really utilize it in a way that would change the game for you. So these are conversations we're having internally, because it's a big area, it's a big gap, in the market. But Casey, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think inventory, like I've said numerous times throughout these office hours, is definitely going to be a huge focus for folks being able to make those intelligent buys and whatnot. So I think this definitely makes sense. And I know we've been talking about different ways to hopefully provide more insight into inventory management within the platform. Obviously, those are all spitball ideas, and figuring out the
Yeah.
best way to do it without slowing down the platform or breaking other things or making it not as effective as it can be is always a little bit of a speed bump or a hurdle. But totally agree there, Vadim, that yeah, inventory management is so key. And I think us being able to provide some a little bit more insights in those areas would definitely make a big impact.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No promises, but these are conversations we are also having internally. See Mike here, joining a bit late, but wanted to catch you and ask suppressed buy box. Will the AI help with this, or should I use a rule base? Yeah, so Maven will automatically handle suppressed buy boxes as best as they can. Suppressed buy boxes are kind of interesting because there's no exact perfect way, for that to like get solved. Like there's no like direct like if this then do that. But it will. There's a few different behaviors that can utilize to make sure it goes in, and unsuppresses that buy box. So yeah, that's baked in. You don't have to create a separate strategy for that. Even in role based, if you are using a role based strategy, you could actually create that strategy in the settings so that it will automatically handle suppressed buy boxes as well. Ideally, you don't have like a suppressed buy box strategy. You don't really need that. I think that's a bit overkill. But either way, you can set that up, to get that sorted out for you automatically.
And we did recently publish a new help article there, Mike, around how Maven's
Mhm.
logic works under different scenarios. And there is a section that covers how it works in suppress buy boxes. So definitely check that out in our resource base. And if you can't find it, I'd be happy to send it over once we jump off.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Yeah, keep those questions coming. We got about 11 minutes left here, so we'd love to dive deeper into some other stuff as these questions are coming through. Nice. Cool.
And earlier this week, Dylan, I had a customer coming in who was newer in Aura, and they were talking or asking about Maven, best ROIs to set it at based on results we've seen. And I know we've briefly mentioned having a lower ROI, maybe even zero at
Mhm.
times, just to give it the most
Yeah.
range. I know you said previously you'd kind of worked with a client on having or lowering that ROI to kind of see those results. Do you
Mhm.
maybe want to speak to kind of how you've seen Maven operate with that wider range compared to its more restricted range when maybe its wings get clipped a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So we were working with a rather large user, multiple six figures per month in revenue. And when we migrated everything over to Maven, like 100% wholesale, everything went to Maven. And naturally, the user was like, "Well, I set my ROI at 30%. Man, with my role base, I'm going to do the same with Maven." And we noticed that the performance was kind of lacking. And so we're like, "All right, well, what could be the case here?" Um, and so the theory was we're probably not giving it enough flexibility to do what it needs to. So let's go ahead and actually slowly lower that ROI. So we actually halved it. So we took it from 30% down to 15%. All of a sudden, things started to take off. What's interesting though is the margin or the ROI across the account for actual sales did not go down. It just gave Maven the flexibility, the range to go take the behaviors it needed to take to achieve the goal it's designed to do. And so the more limitations you place on a model, the worse it can do eventually, right? You need enough limitations. You can't just be like, go do whatever you want, right? You need enough limitations, the sweet spot of like it understands what it can and can't do, what it should and shouldn't do, and what it's designed, to deliver in terms of an outcome. But once you pass that threshold, you start to really pull back and really hinder performance. And it's a different perspective you have to take when you're thinking about creating your strategy, when you're thinking about setting things up. Um, and so something we did internally with like our demo OA account is basically set it to 0% ROI. Like, hey, give it full range. Let's just see what happens. And turns out nothing bad happened. Sales are completely fine. It does basically it goes with the market, right? So if the buy box is actually super low and that's just where the market's at, well, that's where you're going to get sales, right? We're trying not to lose money here, but the market's the market. And so we try to, you know, manipulate that, if you will, is probably not the right term, but we try to, optimize that as much as we can. But something to kind of keep in mind, right, is like you don't want to create an AI model like Maven the same way you would a rule-based strategy. A rule-based strategy is going to do exactly what you tell it to do, nothing more, nothing less. Maven is different, right? We're adding intelligence on top of this, and like it needs to be able to make decisions. So it's kind of like if I said, "Hey, like you can purchase whatever you want. However, you can only do X, Y, and Z. I just gave you a bunch of limitations." Well, it's gonna hinder you, right? It's kind of like fighting with one arm tied behind your back. Don't really want to do that. So you do want to be thinking about how do I allow it to have enough range, enough flexibility to do what it really needs to do. And you should start to see a little bit more performance. So if you're feeling like things are not performing as well, that's the first thing I would look at is starting to basically lower that minimum ROI, profit margin, fixed cost, whatever you happen to, or profit value, whatever you happen to use. Just give it that flexibility. Nice, cool. So we're going to start diving deeper into some other questions here. Love this. most of the time these suppressions seem illogical. Don't they always? I've experienced listings being suppressed and then getting unsuppressed only when I drop the selling price below my profit margins. It gets even more frustrating when Amazon only unsuppresses the buy box if the selling price falls below their feed price, which seems absurd. Yeah, this is sometimes you can foresee these things, other times, yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. This is where really leaning into tools like Keepa to really look at the data and try to pick apart, is it getting suppressed? What price point is it getting suppressed? Because you can't just look at the average sell price anymore. Back when I was a seller, you could do that and be like, oh, like this is kind of what I can, anticipate getting. But suppression's much more common than it used to be. Amazon's really pushing for having really great pricing for the customers. And so if they deem it too high, even with your profit, the fees, doesn't matter. That's what they're saying. It's their house, right? That's my go-to philosophy on stuff like this. It's Amazon's house. We're just playing their game. And so if you do enough due diligence, if you go a little slower on the sourcing side, you can find a lot of these potential red flags and just avoid them. You know, for me, I tend to say if you're a newer seller and you got enough cash, you should take a little bit more risk, just because you're gaining experience, you're learning what works, what doesn't work. As you start to really refine yourself, you really want to be hesitant almost in buying inventory, at least new stuff, right? And this is why I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I had a checklist of reasons not to buy something. And the moment I hit one, I was like, great, move on. I don't care what it is. I don't care how theoretically profitable it is. It is gone. You kind of have to get that logical about your sourcing to avoid a lot of these problems. So what you should do is, compile a list of your products that you've seen these kind of situations occur, and then go and reanalyze them and find the pattern. Because if you can find what that pattern is in the Keepa chart, what have you, great. Bake that into your checklist. Now, all of a sudden, when you're sourcing and you notice that pattern, you go, nope, I'm good. I know it looks good, but actually it's probably going to be the same problem here. Let me go ahead and move on. Sometimes you can do that super easily. Sometimes it is illogical. And you're like, that makes no sense, but here we are. For me, my big filter, if you will, this is not great, but it worked for me when I was a newer seller. If Amazon's on the listing, I don't buy it. I know you can do well, but I didn't feel like dealing with it. And there's enough opportunity and abundance to say, I don't have to, right? Now, a lot of sellers can jump on with Amazon, compete all day long, be super profitable and happy. For me, it just was not worth the effort. And I was doing wholesale too, right? So I'm going deep into products. So I wanted to make sure I'm not going to have these issues. I just avoided it at all costs. Not true for everyone, right? But it just, sometimes you make one decision that eliminates 1,000 down the line. That was my one. So these are things that you kind of start to think about as you're building your sourcing criteria, your sourcing process.
Yeah. Always seems that Amazon seems to favor themselves for some reason on some of those listings. So yeah, I totally
Imagine
totally
that.
get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine that. Um, yeah, so sometimes, yeah, steady selling price, and then all of a sudden it changes. My theory on this is what is most likely happening is that a competitive price became available on that SKU for outside offers, Walmart.com, Target.com, what have you. And Amazon was like, great, we're no longer competitive as a price compared to our competitors. So we're going to go ahead and change that. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to say, great, now you can't sell above that. Sorry. So yeah, things can change overnight. Next 30 seconds, one of your things could go suppress that you've been completely fine on for 2 years. That can definitely happen. Unfortunately, that's one area where there's not a lot of transparency or notification insight into what's going to happen. It's not like, hey, you have 7 days. Here's kind of what we're going to do. It just goes live and it just happens. And you kind of just have to deal with it. Welcome to what we call platform risk. Amazon sets the rules, you play by them or you don't play at all. It's kind of how you got to think about it, unfortunately. Awesome. So we're going to start to wrap up here for time. Any other last minute questions or things we can chat about before we start to wrap up? Awesome. It looks like there was a little bit of an issue when we first went live with the /office hours page. So I apologize for that. Looks like we got that fixed. So people are jumping in. We'll definitely not have that issue next week, but appreciate everybody jumping in here for our weekly office hours. Again, going to do it next week, same time, Tuesday at Wednesdays. We'd love to have you join us again. Bring those questions, bring those ideas again. We talked about having a problem or a frustration list. Start to write those out. Bring them to us. We like solving problems. Uh, we might have already have a solution for you. So we'd love to dive deep into that next week with everybody here. But Casey, any last words?
No last words here. Yeah, kind of a good discussion on a couple things coming through. Express buy boxes, some Maven logic as well. And yeah, if you are just jumping in late, we do post the recordings of these sessions on that same office hours page just towards the bottom there. So always feel free to check those out. But with no more questions, folks, I look forward to helping you out in chat there.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.